we've talked about it on here a number of times, Kevin, looking at the defense. I certainly screamed it from the rooftops as much as I possibly could in 2018 that this was an underrated team, and much of that had to do with the defense. That people that watch Kentucky football or just watch the SEC knew how stacked that defense was, but just because they weren't competing for a national championship that was undervalued across the nation, that defense was one of the top 5 defenses in the country. And then the 2019 drop-off wasn't significant despite all the losses. And now you're in a position here in 2020 that you bring back a defense that ranked top 25 in the nation, and that's despite playing in a conference where you're facing very talented offensive weapons. Cash Daniels gone with 58 tackles and an interception. But other than that, you're well fortified from what you bring back from 2019.
One guy in particular that I want to mention that was Calvin Taylor on the defensive line. He's one of those, you always talked about Josh Allen came to Kentucky as a 2-star recruit, left as the 7th pick in the draft. Calvin Taylor came to Kentucky, barely drafted or barely had any recruiting hints, from anybody. Came here, was second or first in the SEC, tied for sacks last year with 9.5 sacks. Then he's on the Steelers roster this year. Signed as a free agent. And then T.J. Carter was another defensive lineman who they lost. But as you said, I really think this unit is really good. And one of the biggest things to help them was Phil Hoskins, big man defensive tackle up front. He missed all of last season, but he was granted a 6th year of eligibility by the NCAA. And having him back is going to be huge, literally and figuratively, because he'll help plug up that middle. And then you have Quentin Bohanna, another huge guy up front, and then Josh Paschal, a guy we've talked about before. He started on the defensive line, and they moved him to a linebacker position. He's the one had the cancerous in his foot a couple years ago, missed most of the 2018 season, came back and played last year. They're looking at moving him back to defensive end this year. And then another guy, Jordan Wright, but that's your 4 guys up front. And then you move to the linebacker position. As you said, Cash Daniel, he struggled a little bit last year. Most notably, I think people remember the Florida game with the little incident with twisting the quarterback for Florida. But he really played well at the end of the season. And the guy that they were picked to replace him was Chris Oates. And no one really knows the story, what's going on, but he suffered some kind of medical condition, and they said it's not coronavirus related. That's the only thing that they've said, and he's currently in a rehabilitation facility, getting his strength back, getting well. But behind him, you have, like I said, the linebackers are really, really, really strong. Boogie Watson and DeAndre Square are 2 guys. And Jamin Davis, those are 3 guys actually to really, 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 really watch in the linebacker position. And all these guys have some experience and got some experience last year. The interesting thing about the Kentucky season last year, they redshirted everybody that was a freshman, and which is unheard of. But then where you have the thing now where you can play 4 games and still get a red shirt, they redshirted everybody last year, but then they want to move. I want to go ahead and move to the secondary because, like I said, that was the biggest question mark last year because they lost the entire secondary. You think about Mike Edwards, Lonnie Johnson, those guys who were playing on Sunday in the NFL, and turned out the guys coming in that were right behind them did such an incredible job last year. And again, like I said with the running backs, I'll throw Kentucky secondary up against pretty much anybody in the SEC, and like I said, I'm sure I'll get some. I'm sure we'll get some blowback. But you think about Yusuf Corker; he was a guy at free safety. He was our, when I did my season year-end awards, he was my runner-up for defensive player of the year for Kentucky behind Calvin Taylor. And you throw in Brandon Eccles, Quandre Mosley, and we haven't even talked about Kelvin Joseph, who's a cornerback who transferred from LSU, sat out last year, and is going to be eligible this year. And we think he's going to slide right into one of those cornerback spots and probably start from day one. So I think the defense as I said, the defense, Kentucky is strong. It's you're not used to hearing us say this, but I think Kentucky is strong in just about every position this year, and it's going to be really interesting. It's going to be really interesting to see how the season plays out. I think 8 wins, anything less than 8 wins, honestly could be considered a disappointment. And when have you ever heard that with Kentucky football? So I mean, just first look, I'm thinking maybe 9-3. You know, obviously they've got to have some things fall their way, but I think 9-3 would be a really good, obviously a great season and a really good that would be my prediction when I get around to my prediction thread for Last Word on College Football for the season. That's what I'm going to go with is 9-3. So.
And just to highlight a positive and a negative note on the defense. So the Oats loss isn't going to cripple the defense. There's just too much talent there, but it's a fairly significant loss if he's not able to come back. 5th on the team in tackles last year with 46. But the pickup of Kelvin Joseph, and as soon as you said that name, it sparked, boom. I remember him being a top recruit. 5th rated safety in high school football coming out to LSU and a top 40 player in the country, regardless of position, like elite 5-star level talent, Kelvin Joseph. So like you say, he may step right into the starting lineup and you may have, at least in regards to talent ceiling, a tremendous player right there in Kelvin Joseph on defense.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it just goes to show the, how, we talk recruiting all the time, how Kentucky has gone from getting the 1- and 2-star guys to, solid 3s, 4s, and occasionally now the 5-star guys now, and which you never would have had, expected 3 or 4 years ago. But just, the job that Stoops and Vince Marrow and all the guys, Steve Clinkscale especially on the staff, is like I said, just the quality of player that you see coming into Lexington now is something we've never seen, at least not in, any time that I can remember, anytime recently, I should say.
So, Kevin, you basically answered what was going to be my finishing question here about what's success for Kentucky in 2020. So it sounds like if they go 8-4, you're going to feel like, okay, that's what this football team should do. I'm not overjoyed about it, but it's a solid season. This is a good football team. This is a top 20, 25 football team. But if they do, and obviously it has to do with how well did they do in the division and who they beat and who they lose to. So we won't dissect it, but 9 and above wins sounds like then you're feeling really good about what this team accomplished, and anything short of 8-4 is going to be a disappointment.
Right. That, like I said, now that's my opinion. There may be others out there who don't have quite the, quite. And I've seen many of the preseason, projections, have them 6-6, maybe even 5-7, and the question is always, about the health of Terry Wilson. Like I said, I think he's going to be fine. Like I said, schedule wise, it's tougher this year. They lost Arkansas and they go to Auburn this year. They have to go to Auburn, they have to go to Florida, and have to go to Tennessee, and then they also go to Louisville. But they have Georgia, Mississippi State, and South Carolina at home. So, and then as always, Kentucky, has the 3 games every year that they should win. Starting off this year, it's Eastern Michigan, which I think that game, which they've moved that game now. It was supposed to be on Saturday, September 5th. They moved it to the 3rd, to a Thursday night because of the Kentucky Derby. Because of the coronavirus, the Derby got rescheduled to Labor Day weekend, and we all figured it was coming. And so now that's going to be on a Thursday night. But you figure they start with Eastern Michigan, and then they also have Kent State, Eastern Illinois, and then they play Louisville. Now I know everyone is really high on Louisville this year, but I still think. Now I don't know if you are, but some of the preseason prognostications I've seen, everybody's real high on Louisville. I'm not buying it just yet because Kentucky, the last 2 seasons have beat them 101-23. But
you're still better. People discount defense. There's actually a side of the ball called defense, and when Louisville's given up 50 points a game, and Kentucky has like a legit top 20 defense in the country, that should be taken into consideration.
Right, yeah. And I think just eyeballing it right now, I'll say. They could beat Florida. I will say the 3 losses. I'll say they'll lose to Florida, they'll lose to Tennessee at home, and I think they can steal. I think they can steal the game at Auburn. I think they're pretty similar. I think Kentucky, especially if you end up in a situation where there's no fans or limited fans, some of those, some of the home field advantages that those teams have, if you have 5,000 people in the stands or even less than that, kind of goes away a little bit. So, but the Auburn game is one that I definitely have circled that I think they can go in and steal on the road.
And Kevin, to highlight the expectations difference at Kentucky, you say 8-4 is just going to be okay. I look at games like Missouri and South Carolina, where in the past it was like, well, we hope we could steal one of those. Now it's like, well, we got to beat both of them. Right. So that's the difference in expectations too.
Yeah, you're exactly right, because Kentucky will be going for, to get my memory right, 6 straight win over Missouri, which should be the only one time in the history of the Kentucky's been in the SEC they've beaten a team 6 years in a row, and that was Vanderbilt from the late 70s to early 80s. And they had a chance to do it at South Carolina last year, but they lost pretty handily down there, and that was right after Terry Wilson had gotten hurt, and then Sawyer Smith was hurt, but no one really wanted to admit that he was hurt, so he was still playing, but it was obvious he wasn't 100%. And then if you remember, they put in Bowden late in the fourth quarter, and he led them to a touchdown. And then that started that next week against Arkansas, and that started that 8-game run. So, like I said, I'm saying 9-3. Now, we come back in December and they go 6-6 or 7-5. You can be like, well, you got a little too excited, or you're, believe your own press clippings or something.
Well, Kevin, I will say this. I don't say this to anybody else, but I'm rooting for you.
Oh, cool. Well, thank you.
I root for this football team. I don't know why. I just think it's a great story. I think so when I do my research on Kentucky football versus any other team, what happens is I just type in the team. I type in Arkansas, I type in Auburn, and football comes to the top. The first page is full of football. Kentucky's the only team when I Google, I have to put Kentucky football in to then do my research, because otherwise I'll get all the basketball.
Right, you get all the basketball stuff. Exactly, yeah.
And Duke, of course. But those are the only two.
That's funny. What about North Carolina? Do you get football?
They're a little bit higher on the football totem pole, but yeah, it's probably more basketball. But I definitely noticed it with Kentucky and Duke. Mm-hmm. Kevin McGuffey on the line from Last Word on College Football. You got to jump on over there and check out what they're working on. They've always done a great job here for us. Kevin, we appreciate you stopping by as always.
Well, thank you, Mark, for having me as always. I enjoy getting to come in and talk some football. Throw one little plug out there since you mentioned Last Word. Hopefully, starting this weekend, we'll start doing position previews for the team. Start with quarterbacks, and we'll do like backs and receivers. But I've had a little series I've been doing for the last couple months about doing like greatest wins in history, and it's been really fun. I started with the 2010s. And then went to 2000s and the 1990s. It's really been fun doing some research and, going back, oh, they beat this team, this year, and then going back and reading the reports of the game. So if you're over there, I encourage you to check it out. Check out all the stuff. I mean, as you said, Tony Siracusa, all the guys, do such great work. It's really, I'm really, honored to be part of that, just a small part of that group, because, they cover 25, 30 teams now. I think it is something like that. So.
Always appreciated, Kevin. Stop by anytime.
All right. Thanks, sir. Appreciate it.